Well, I was born in Old Church Hospital in Romford, and we lived above a shop in Harold Hill in Essex, which is sort of the it's kind of urban part of Essex. I actually think it's London now. But my dad was a greengrocer working in the shop where we lived above for the first 5 years of my life, and my mum was a very militant dinner lady. But my dad, really, the defining thing about my dad is that he was a big war hero. He had a Distinguished Service Medal. He was a Royal Naval Commando, and came out of World War II really lucky to be alive. He had his torso, his body was just a massive scar tissue. And one of the most vivid memories of my childhood is seeing my dad take off his shirt on the beach and people being profoundly shocked by the sight of him, because he was very good looking, very, very good looking guy. But his body, I guess they didn't get to him very quickly under the circumstances. And his body was a massive scar tissue. And he was, he was a very gentle man. He was almost bizarrely gentle. That he would, if he saw like a ladybug or a butterfly in the house, he would carry it out. He would carry it outside. My mum and I used to laugh about it, but he used to say, well, why take a life when you can do the opposite? But he was, but there was a kind of darkness under him because of what he'd done. And in a neighbourhood of hard men, he was a killer.
I just want to pick you up on your militant dinner lady mum. What do you mean by that?
She was old school Labour, my mum. My mum was, it was just tribal with her. She was very much the foundation of the Red Wall. That it would have been for her. It would have been something akin to treachery to not vote Labour. And she had a. When I say I say it kind of semi-jokingly, but only semi-jokingly. She loved strike action. She loved industrial action. She loved exercising the power that she had. And I've got a very vivid memory. She had a very distinctive look, my mum. She had, she would wear like a white raincoat, that kind of, Casablanca type raincoat, and leather boots and a mini skirt, and have a hair tie back. And she was kind of Barbara Windsor stature. And she's very, very distinctive looking. And I remember once that she was when I was growing up in Billericay. We moved out to Billericay when I was 5. I remember there was a strike at her school, and she was on the cover of the local paper, the local rag, as we called it. And my dad, who was politically the opposite to my mum, and didn't like the Labour Party at all, or the Tories, come to that.
Did he vote, your dad?
Yeah, he did. He was. He used to take me out leafleting. He used to take me out leafleting for the Liberals. And my dad pointed out this picture of this woman who was definitely my mum, holding up on a picket line outside the school, holding up some kind of placard in a very distinctive look. And she said, "It's not me. That's not me." She completely denied it. She lied to our faces. And so it was, it was interesting growing up with the pair of them, because, and I often think of their differences now, because, they really loved each other. They were like together from the time they were 16 until my dad died of lung cancer when he was 62. And they were together for a lifetime, but they really disagreed about politics, and I was brought up in a house where you could, disagree with someone, even profoundly disagree with them, and not only still get on with them and still quite like them, but actually love them. So it was a good. I feel very grateful for that background, because I think it's a healthy way to be, and I think that we're lacking that now as a society. We're lacking that, agreeing to disagree. We can't do it anymore.
Let's turn to you. Can you remember the first time that you voted? I'm sure you can, and I'd like you to tell us about what you remember about that particular election, whichever election that was.
It was the first EU referendum that I voted in. That was I didn't vote. My first vote wasn't in a general election. Right. It was in the EU referendum, and I voted to be a part of it, to be a part of this bright new, 1970s future. I was very, and now when I look back, there were some very eloquent voices like Peter Shaw and Tony Benn explaining why we possibly shouldn't give away our national sovereignty so easily. But at the time, I thought it was obvious that we should be a part of it. But this is the 70s in the UK, and it was a pretty, especially I was a little kid in the 60s. I was a kid in the 60s, and to grow up in that kind of that feeling of optimism and the great music everywhere, and everybody looked like Julie Christie or Terence Stamp, at least in our fantasies. And then it was the 70s was a bit of a come down with the 3-day week and industrial action and all that. So the idea that we could somehow be rescued, we could jump in this little dinghy in the middle of the English Channel, or La Manche as the French called it, and it just seems, there was no question that we should do it. So that was the first time I voted. And I think I had a lot of my mum's Labour tribalism, that I felt that was my party, that I felt that, and my dad, would get me to go out leafleting for the Liberals at a general election, and he was of the mind that the Tories were for big business and Labour were for big unions, and he wasn't really particularly a liberal, but it was by default we were out there sticking our leaflets through the doors. Yeah.
We're going to talk about Brexit a little bit later on, but first of all, so in your first general election that you voted in, you voted Labour, by the sounds of it.
I think I must have done. Yeah, I've got no real memory of it. I mean, the only political party I've ever been a member of is the Labour Party. I'd been a young, wild music journalist.
Yeah.
And I probably had idealistic dreams about part of Rock Against Racism and all that, and and probably I was I'd grown out of that a bit and thought, well, actually, if there's ever going to be any real change, it'll be through the established political parties. And so I can remember being in my late 20s and I don't know, feeling quite alienated at meetings, the kind of people that were at the meetings.
So you were active. You used to go to Labour Party meetings.
I did in my my late 20s. That kind of all went by the board. I became a single dad quite young, and I had enough on my plate. I kind of just changed overnight, really, that my world suddenly was focused on this 4-year-old boy that I didn't feel particularly mature or grown up myself, and it had a lot of freedom. I mean, just a ridiculous amount of freedom at the height of sex and drugs and rock and roll in the first half of my 20s, and then it was a complete turnaround when suddenly I had this little boy to bring up, and I remember standing at the school gates with my father and saying, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it, Dad. I really don't know if I can do it. My dad said to me, you have to. And so that was it. That was the end of it.
Did the state help you? Did you feel like the state, governments, did it put an arm around you during that period?
No, not at all. I mean, I've never, I don't feel that the state has ever put its arm around me. I mean, I passed my 11 plus, went to a grammar school that I really, really loved. And it was a fantastic school. I mean, nothing, probably not in the top 50 or 100 but to me, as a working class kid, to be suddenly among kids from every different kind of family, every different kind of economic level. I think on my first day at my grammar school, I was sitting with I had my friend Kevin on one side, who was from an Anglo-Irish family, and he had about 10 kids, and he had a blazer that a couple of his brothers had worn going to that school. And on my other side was my friend Lawrence, whose dad had a boat, a yacht. And it was like the experience that people talk about when they did their national service, where suddenly their eyes were opened up to, God, there's so many different people in the world. There's so many different kinds of people with so many different experiences. Grammar school was like that for me. And then just when I was 15, it became a comprehensive. And because some privately educated Labour politician decided that grammar schools were a crime against humanity, and so it went from being a very, very good grammar school, a school that I loved, to a school where education wasn't cool, where nobody cared, where you could bunk off if you want. And I was a very ordinary kid, that I tended to go with the flow. That when it was all Latin mottos and getting our exams 2 years early, then I went along with that. And as soon as it was you could bunk off if you wanted to and nobody was even going to care about it or even notice, then I did that. So I got out when I was 16, and I never felt, and it was only really with retrospect when I look back and I think, wow, just that, some ideologically driven politician got it so completely wrong, at least from my perspective. So I felt like the state had poked me in the eye, really. I mean, I have to say, I did feel lucky and blessed to be around when I was at the, you know, I mean, I started at the NME when I was 22, and you know, so I feel lucky that I was around at that time, and it is really just dumb luck, you know, that I couldn't, you know, if I was a kid now, that opportunity would not be there, that ladder, that pathway to my dreams and to a 50-year career simply wouldn't exist.
So you move into journalism, as you say, at the NME. It's the late 70s. It's the start of the punk era, a very anti-establishment movement. I guess anti-established political parties too. Ska music, rock against racism, mods, skinheads, the rise of the National Front. It was a very busy political time. What were the politics of that time?
The established parties were not really involved in the national debate. That's what it felt like to me. It felt like it was really kind of the last stand of racism in this country. And I think when people talk about racism today, that you know that sometimes don't appreciate how incredibly far this country has come, because it was pretty virulent. That's my memory of it. It was pretty vicious and nasty and institutionalized in this country in the 70s, in the late 70s. And so, you know, we wanted to change the world. We wanted to make the world a better place. And it was clearly, you know, we had a very heightened sense of what was right and what was wrong. But also, you know, like our hippie cousins 10 years before, we also loved getting completely off our faces and staying up for 3 nights in a row. So, you know, it's kind of ironic that the generation that's usually most passionate about changing the world is the one that's most likely to stay up partying all night. You know, I can see the irony now, but it was lost on me at the time, I think.
When did you start to question your loyalty to the Labour Party?
My father was convinced that the Labour was certainly not for a working man like him, that a working man that wasn't in a union, a guy that was you know, that served his country, that had, you know, he was quite bitter, my dad, I think, about his friends who had died, you know. And I grew up being shown pictures of boys really who died at Monte Cassino or Sicily or Elba, which was his last raid as a commando. And he never felt that it was a land fit for heroes. So I think, you know, my father's voice was always whispering in one ear. My mother was whispering in the other ear, saying, if Labour don't look out for you, then nobody will. I think probably what really killed my passion for the Labour Party was going to meetings, and thinking, I don't really recognise these people. Maybe I'm in the wrong room. Maybe I'm just out of place here.
Can you remember who was the prime ministerial candidate then?
I can't believe that I would have voted for my dear old Michael. I think that I was part of that. I mean, it's quite possible I voted for nobody. You know, I think I can clearly remember being a Kinnock supporter and thinking, you know, he will stand up to the bullies and he'll do what's right, although it seemed like an impossible fight. But I did have that. You know, I mean, I think the whole thing, you know, what we saw at the last general election, there's a difference between getting people to not vote for Jeremy Corbyn and then or getting people to actually go out and vote Tory, you know, because it was a huge thing. It was a big thing. And I can remember very clearly, you know, just Michael Foot at the Cenotaph. And I've always enjoyed watching Jeremy Corbyn at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Day, because he was always absolutely immaculate. Corbyn, whatever you say about him, he was absolutely immaculate at the Cenotaph, because it was a lesson that you know, had been the thing that Labour never got and still don't get, and probably get it less than they've ever done these days, even with their new leader, is the patriotism of the working class.
Yeah.
That it's just absolutely there, and it's real, you know. And for me, it was not some, you know, flag waving jingoism, you know. It was the scar tissue on half of my father's body, you know. That's what it was for me. That's what he did for my country, to give me the kind of, you know, the freedom to, you know, to hang out with the Sex Pistols and to pursue whatever career I wanted, you know. And it was, he was part of that generation that paid for it, you know, paid for it in blood. And it was not a small thing, and it's still not a small thing for me. You know, this country's national identity and patriotism is not a small thing for me. And I can remember having a conversation with Ed Miliband, and And I really liked Ed, and I can remember talking to him about his dad was a North London communist, but he was also a war hero. He was a huge war hero. And I was talking to Ed about, just where we stood. And he was a very easy guy to talk to. And I said, more than anything, more than like Tory or Labour, I think of myself as a British patriot. And he was a little bit taken aback, I think. And he said, well, we're all patriots, But I'm not sure that, that someone like Ed really believes that. I think the party is more important than the country. And for me, it never could be.
If I've read and done my research correctly,
Yes.
was 2015 the first time you voted for the Conservative Party?
No, I can remember voting for Major. I can remember voting.
Oh.
I can remember voting for Major, and I can remember my friends being shocked that.
So you never voted for Blair?
I think I voted for Blair twice out of the 3 times. I think.
So did you vote for Gordon Brown, 2010?
I think I voted for Brown. Yeah, I think reluctantly. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes people vote without any kind of enthusiasm at all. They find it. It's a miserable. It's not. It should be done in the white heat of passion, and often they just seem so mediocre. I remember being appalled when Brown said of that working class voter, that bigoted woman,
Gillian Duffy.
Gillian Duffy, because she had the temerity to bring up immigration, and just to even bring up that subject, this decent woman, this patently, obviously decent woman who was like the absolute backbone of the Labour Party, to be dismissed like that. I thought that was pretty low. I actually think that's, for me, that's the defining moment of modern British politics.
You often say that the Labour Party now despises the working class.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you about, I'm not going to challenge you on that one because you've said it many times, but what I am going to ask you about is the column that was just before the 2019 election, where you said it is the Tory party that now has the values, now represents the values of the working class.
I wouldn't claim that Boris has lived up to every expectation. I think a large part of that is completely beyond his controls. I think we've made a hash of it dealing with COVID-19 in this country. I think perhaps that was inevitable because we didn't have the experience of SARS, and really it's the first time we've had to deal with this kind of thing. But I still think that, and I think, I can see Rishi Sunak being a deeply beloved prime minister. I can imagine it very easily. Yeah, and I do think that, and I think that the Labour Party has largely been annexed by people that have never met a working class person in their life, and they never really cease to amaze me. I thought a great defining moment for the modern Labour Party was that conference that they had. I think it was in Liverpool, where they were all waving their Palestinian flags, and that's fine. But they would never wave the flag of their own country with at all, let alone with the same kind of fervor. And to me, that's odd. That's odd that you would, it's that. It goes back to that, the classic George Orwell line about, people of the left would, I'm paraphrasing, people of the left would rather rob a church box than stand for the national anthem, I believe he said.
Tony, it's Tom here. Can I ask you, your migration from largely voting Labour to largely voting Tory, which I think is a rough summation of your voting history, what do you say to the accusations that you're a traitor to your initial cause and you're a traitor to your class? People
are free to believe whatever they want to believe. I think, I don't really take those accusations seriously. I think that there was a lot more. I was at the Mirror for 18 years. Piers Morgan took me there, and I was Piers's first signing when he became our 13-year-old editor. And there was a kind of diversity of opinion, not just at that newspaper, but abroad, in the country, in the national debate, which is just not there anymore. I mean, even during the great debate about should we save the pound or should we join the euro? Now, I was active in the Save the Pound movement because I felt passionately that a currency that had served us well should be retained. And I can remember going to a meeting. I was thinking about it today, and one of the people at the meeting, Harry Enfield, was there, and it was very, very small meeting. There was about 3 or 4 of us, and Bob Geldof was there, and Bob was very, very passionate about. He thought it was a good idea. He thought it was a good idea to keep the pound rather than sign up for the euro. You were kind of allowed to disagree. Nobody ever really. There wasn't like nobody thought you were wicked, really. if you wanted to keep it. It was so different from the Brexit debate. And when I saw Bob, who I don't know well, but I knew a bit from our days in rock and roll. When I saw him, sticking his fingers up at the fishermen on the Thames, I did think, wow, am I imagining it, or were we on the same side during the Save the Pound debate? And
not that I would really defend Bob Geldof, but wasn't he sticking his fingers up at Nigel Farage rather than the fisherman?
Yeah, that's what he'd tell you. I mean, I think he was probably sticking his fingers up at the whole, the whole cabal, the whole lot of us. Yeah. But I'm sure he would say that he deeply respected the fishermen that were on the boat. But who cares, really? Who cares? He was, the face twisted with hatred is what I remember. But I also remember Bob and I being on the same side during that debate about saving the pound, and you weren't wicked. It wasn't like the Brexit debate where if you thought that our country is best served outside of the European Union, if you thought that our national identity was preserving, if you thought we should have politicians who we can kick out if we want, we should have leaders who we can kick out, and you can't trust, Monsieur Barnier and Jean-Claude Juncker and a lot of them. If you thought that, you weren't racist, ignorant, uneducated, be dead soon, all the kind of the nasty, and that, and the true irony, I think, is that human beings don't really like change. And I think that if there'd have been a little bit of empathy, if there'd have been a little bit of understanding, if there'd have been a lot of respect, then this country would have stayed in the European Union. First of all, it needed Brussels to realize what they were losing with this country, this great country leaving. And also, I think, the Remain side, I think with a little bit more empathy, with a little bit more, we get it, we understand where you're coming from, I think we would have stayed. There was absolutely none of that. I mean, right from the start, right up until now, to have that view that we're actually better served with politicians we can kick out whenever we want or whenever we get the chance. There's still this poison is aimed at, and I think that's why Boris has got an 80-seat majority, largely.
Final question from me. You're one of the very few journalists, I think, ever to have gone from the Daily Mirror to the Sun after a very long time at the Mirror, and that's really crossing a giant Rubicon, certainly in Fleet Street. Did you have any sense of regret about doing it, or did you embrace the carnage you were creating?
Ideologically, it wasn't a huge leap, because at the Mirror, I'd been free to, Tony's against joining the Euro. That's okay. It was kind of okay. It was, there was a degree of leeway, which I don't think exists anymore. I find myself strangely adrift from my libertarian friends on the subject of face masks. But to me, I think, I believe in face masks, and I know that I'm out of step with a lot of my political allies. But I think that, I didn't have any regrets about it.
I'm going to press you for a yes or no on this one. Is there any chance that you could vote for the Labour Party at the next election?
Yeah.
Like Keir Starmer?
No.
Okay, so we come to the end of the interview where we try and define the politics of the person that we've just interviewing. I'm going to say you were an angry young man who turned into an angry older man. And when it comes to your vote, patriotism comes first.
Yeah, I mean, I love my country in a way that I don't love any political party, and I could never love any political party. And even when, my dad was taking me leafleting for the Liberals, or when I was going to deadly boring Labour Party meetings, I never felt love for any political party. And it is a pragmatic decision. I think, economic competence is not to be sniffed at. And I just think, as it stands right now, the Tories are better at it. I don't say that they're competent on every other issue of the day, even the biggest issue of the day. I wouldn't claim excessive competence, certainly. But I'm defined by the love for my country rather than any political affiliation.
You've painted a beautifully vivid picture of your political views, and we thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Tony Parsons.
Thanks for having me.